Welcome, everyone, to the Workforce Navigator podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a super interesting conversation with Christine Doane. Now, Christine, you are currently the VP of Global Human Resources and Head of HR at Genea. And that's a full-time position. But also, we were just talking before this, and I got a little bit tired hearing about everything about your personal life, from having been on Wheel of Fortune and be successful to being kind of a master gardener. And I want you to explain a little bit more about what you do with butterflies, all the way through to you are a softball coach for your daughter's team. You got a lot going in life. But what we're going to talk about here today is an experience that you just went through, but you've been feeling in your career for a long time. The topic is what you'd never expect to learn from an executive master's program in human resource management. So we're going to unplug that. And what you wouldn't expect is to really address the elephant in the room, that why in HR aren't we recognized for our contributions? Like, we have direct line to the overall growth of the business and bringing in high performance teams, but we don't quite get the credit that we deserve. And so we're going to be unpacking that. And how do we advocate for ourselves? And how do we actually just kind of address that elephant in the room? But before we do that, I want to hear a little bit more about your gardening and the butterflies and a few other things about you.
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said, I'm the head of human resources at Genea, but I like to keep myself busy and do other things that I find interesting. So, my mom got me interested in monarch butterflies, and we planted a bunch of milkweed and butterfly attracting plants, pollinators, they're called. And we actually got our backyard certified as a monarch waystation. So, during the summer, we get a bunch of caterpillars that turn into butterflies in our backyard. It's really awesome. It's fun for me and my daughter and my husband to experience that and watch that throughout the summer. So it's been awesome.
Well, thank you. It was interesting because we started talking in our past conversations about this issue of that we're not really respected for what we really do inside of these organizations. And you lit up. You said, Steve, I just went to this executive master's program. It was one of the number one things we talked about. Tell me what the name of that program was, where you took it, and then let's kind of dive deep into this.
Sure. The program was through Cornell University. It was called the Executive Master of Human Resources Management, and it was a hybrid program, so partially online and partially in person through residential sessions, which was really cool to be on campus. The focus of the program really started with a foundation of business fundamentals, which surprised me. The first 4 classes we took were not HR classes. They were business courses around financial analysis, understanding your customer, what the different customer segments are, what your value proposition of your business is. And those 4 courses really were the core of the program and helping us understand that to be a true HR strategic partner, you first need to understand the business. And I think one of the things that it taught me was that there is this misconception in HR when we're being given a problem that we need to come up with an HR solution right away. But one of the things that this program really taught me was to stop, ask questions of the leadership to better understand how does this align with the business goals, not only because it's helpful for us as HR leaders, but because sometimes when a solution is presented to us, it's not always actually the best solution. So as an HR leader, being able to understand what is this solution, why are we making the solution, and help kind of back out a little bit so that we can make sure it's the right solution for the problem that we're trying to solve, and really adding value as an HR leader first through those conversations, helping guide the thinking if needed or changing the thinking if needed. And then from there, once you understand the foundations of the business and the problem, then bringing in the HR solutions from the people standpoint, but definitely not starting there. So one of our professors, Chris Collins, who I loved, who was my advisor, and he would give us these case studies of organizations that were trying to do big things. And he would say, as HR leaders, what do you do next? And we would start thinking, okay, well, we need a talent plan and we need location for our employees. We need a comp structure. And he would always say, stop. Go back, ask the questions first of me as a leader, why we're doing this. Help yourself understand so that we can make sure it's the right direction and the right decision. And then we add the people piece on top of that. So that was really the foundation of the program that helped change the way I think as an HR leader.
So, how did that reformulate your opinion of why, as HR and talent professionals, we don't typically have a seat at the table. We're not seen as a strategic arm of the business. We're looked at as a support function of the business. How did that change the way that you thought about that perception and how we can change it?
So I think historically, as an HR function, we were more focused on administrative functions, payroll, employee files, benefits administration, policies. And over the last couple decades, the people who came before us in HR started to change that narrative, which is awesome for us to continue to ride that wave of adding more strategic value and being better partners. So, as HR leaders, you're not always given a seat at the table. The people that you work with, your leadership maybe, they haven't experienced a strategic HR leader and they don't always understand what that means. So, our CEO, who I love and we've worked together well for the last 4 years, when I joined, I was a team of one and I really had to just keep the lights on, do the payroll, administer the benefits, make a staffing plan. But over time, as I started to invite myself to the table, if I wasn't always invited, and show my value through having those conversations around the strategy and having decent insights and decent perspectives, and then being invited back to the table, it allowed my CEO and our leadership to create a better relationship with HR to change their experience of HR. And our CEO has said that he hasn't worked with an HR leader that thinks that way. And so he had to learn how we work best together. And now, when something comes up, a business decision, he will call me and he'll say, "Here's what's going on. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think?" And I feel like a thought partner to him. So I think earning that trust through understanding, going back to the foundations of the program that I mentioned earlier, understanding the foundation of the business. Why are we here? How do we make money? Who are our competitors? What sets us apart? Understanding all of that and having those types of conversations will show that you add more value than just traditional administrative HR. And I think people, at least in my experience, have appreciated a partner. Sometimes it's lonely as a leader and making decisions in a vacuum. And when you come in as a thought partner that is a safe thought partner that they can trust, that's proven themselves, then I think there's an openness to that. So that's been my experience in helping build that relationship and change that narrative at Genea.
Such a breath of fresh air. I think almost everybody that's listening right now is probably thinking, I wish I had that relationship, or I wish I had that at another level. What are some of your suggestions? You had to earn that. You've talked about understanding the business from a business perspective. So, what were the challenges when you first started coming in and talking from a business perspective? And nobody expected that. What were some of the challenges to overcome that you could share with us?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. When HR starts talking about the business, people look at you like, "What are you talking about?" But the more you get in, and for me, doing my own research on the side, facilitated through the program, we had to write a lot about who are our competitors, what makes us different. That really helped me understand it. But through interviews with our other leaders, asking them questions about our differentiating value propositions, about what they see the marketplace look like, they wanted to have those conversations. They wanted to talk about their business and their thoughts on it. So that really helped me to change that narrative and engage in those conversations. And then once you engage in that and you bring in your own perspective because you're keeping up on what's happening in the industry, you're attending the trade shows alongside your team, you're sitting in the team meetings, and you're talking to the employees and you're talking to the leadership. HR has a really interesting vantage point where we bring all these different areas together that no one else in the business has the opportunity to bring together. So when you start understanding the business, talking to the leaders about it, and you bring in valuable insights, they do start to see that it takes time. It does not happen overnight. And for me, I had to allow it to happen on its own time. But when you look at it over the course of months or a couple years, things changed drastically for us. So that helped me engaging in those conversations and bringing my own insights into what was happening in the industry and the marketplace with our competitors as well.
So, a lot of great stuff you just said there. One of the biggest takeaways was you started interviewing your internal customers, all the different departments, whether it's marketing or sales or HR. We are all in support of all the rest of us. So, you think about it, the visual that came up was that Those are your internal customers that you're supporting. And the number one thing we do as companies is we know our customers. We talk to them. Like we understand their challenges, their needs, their pain points, emotional, rational. The more that we know about them, the better we can serve them. Now, here's the question. All of a sudden, they've got somebody from HR calling up and saying, "Hey, I want to talk." How did you position those conversations with them to get that openness, that receptivity? You said they really wanted to talk about this.
I think it's human nature that people want to talk about things that they're passionate about, that they care about, that they know about, and they also want to help. So for me, it aligned with being newer in the company and coming in and saying, I want to learn and I want to be able to add more value and I want to help your organization, help me understand what you know and your perspectives. I didn't get a lot of pushback from that. I think the hardest thing was just finding the time because our leaders are extremely busy. They're traveling, they're meeting with customers, which of course is very important. So I think it's just finding the time. But when we did take the time to hear from them and then being able to use that information, those conversations aren't just about tell me what's going on in the industry and tell me what's going on in the market and our customers, but it was also about what are your challenges? And you can weave some of those things in there so that as an HR leader, you're understanding how do your people fit into all of this, and then it starts to give you the foundation for those bigger conversations that come along time or along the road over time around, okay, we have this foundational conversation about the business, about the marketplace, about your team, and then things come up, so it gives you that foundation to continue to add value with them over time. So I think coupling it with all of that, I didn't have big issues. I think people want to help and they want to talk about things that they know about and they want to be seen as an expert. So it wasn't difficult other than finding the actual time and prioritizing it to do it.
And I love how you positioned it. Help me help you. You said that in various form there. There's going to be very few people who are like, no, I don't want your help.
Yeah, and you said something that I love, and that was that we're all on the same team, and I think about that, and I tell people that internally all the time. We're all on the same team, and we all should be rowing in the same direction, and maybe we have different ideas on how to get there and what's best, but at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. We're all here to help each other, and that's my job is to make sure that I understand what's going on in their worlds, so that I can help them as well.
I had an idea. It was from a chief information security officer that was on this podcast, and his team culture was his top priority. And it was about we're one team. And he has in his email signature, hashtag one team in his email signature. And I thought, what a great idea. 2 weeks ago, I put it in. It's now in all my email signatures because we are one team. It's not an us versus them. And what you did is you made a gesture and you reached out and said, as your team member, how can I better help you? Very few people are going to deny that or turn that down.
And I do think sometimes you do have to remind people that we're on the same team. We have the same goals. And sometimes when things get a little difficult, especially if you have different opinions on how to get somewhere or different opinions on the problem at hand, you just have to remind people anytime you have a difficult conversation, we're on the same team. We're working together. I want to hear your perspective. I want to share my perspective, and let's come up with the best solution that we can together.
So I want to transition this into specific ways in more HR typical related fashion, because we all know that we're the ones that help facilitate bringing in talent. And how do we retain that talent? The costs of turnover are so significant. So you have this idea of retaining talent through evolving skill sets. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what you were talking about there.
Definitely. So, like I said, when I joined Genea, I was a team of one. We were a smaller organization. We had 40 employees just in the US, and we've scaled since then over the last few years to about 150 across multiple countries. And we have had to figure out how do we help team members grow along with us because the skill set when you're small and you're more of a startup is wear a lot of hats and be able to do a lot of different things and all hands on deck. But as you grow and you scale and you onboard, you have to shift as leaders and including the employees, you have to shift to get better at figuring out what is our shared vision, going back to the teamwork. We're on the same team. So what is the vision? Where are we going? What are our core values? That's something that we did to help get everyone on the same page is what are our core values? How do we operate as a company? We took that from what the employees were telling us in surveys and comments, as well as what we authentically were already doing and wanted to be. So we came up with core values that we really live by a purpose statement and figured out how do we communicate this vision to people, because before it was small enough that everyone just knew the vision, they're all going in the same direction. But as you grow and you start expanding, we have employees in 23 US states and across 4 countries. And so how do we ensure that everyone knows the vision, because they're not sitting in the office? So talking about it in town halls, giving regular updates on goals, where we're going, and using those core values to incentivize behavior and help guide the employees, that really helped us allow the employees to grow with Genea as we saw where we were going. And again, it goes back to the vision and where you're going so that people know that. And then it also goes back to hiring the right people. So you have to find talent who fits your current need that you have today, the burning need, but you have to find people who are going to grow with you over the next few years as well, and who are able to keep up as the company scales. So what we would have hired for before, maybe someone who could wear a lot of hats, we now start to hire people who are more experts in their area, who have done this for a while, who can bring those insights. And we start looking at the soft skills, the personality. So before we would look for people in our industry because we thought, well, we need people that have our industry knowledge. Well, what we learned, and it goes back to understanding your industry and your competitors, is that Genea offers cloud solutions, and many of our competitors are still on-prem hardware, just not in the cloud, not progressive. And so when we were hiring people from our similar industry, we were finding that we weren't getting the right culture fit. They weren't progressive enough. They weren't problem solvers. They weren't excited about the mission of growth and creating the structure with us. So we said, let's zoom out a little bit and let's hire people that actually fit with our culture and our core values. And as soon as we did that, we saw such a shift in the type of people that we were hiring, the retention, the satisfaction, and then that all leads to the results too from the team and meeting their KPIs and meeting their goals and helping the company move forward and continue to be successful. So that was a big shift for us, was hiring for the right talent to grow with us as well.
Such a big deal. We've all heard the term soft skills. It's one of those things we've heard so many times that it's kind of like, womp, womp, womp. What does that really mean? And you just so articulately said that there are things that were more important than industry experience. Nike used to, and I don't know if they have, this might be 20-year-old information. They used to hire for the right corporate athletes that they didn't necessarily have the exact skill set that we were looking at. Or because I'm sure you've worked with hiring managers internally and you've gotten all the information. You're like, this person just doesn't exist. That doesn't have this and this and this and this and this and this. So what can we do here? And what you're saying is you use words like mindset and values and passion. Tell me a little bit, if you were to balance the traditional way of looking at skill sets, experience base, that is the traditional way that we look to hire, and then this new soft skills and mindsets and passion. What's the balance? What's more important? Are they equally important? But now with your experience, how do you look at that?
That's a good question. And I think that's the balance and the dance that you're constantly playing, is trying to figure out how much of each do you need. So, one thing that we talk about is what's trainable, what could you train someone on, and how long would it take to train someone? So, if we have someone, let's say in billing, and they say they need to know how to use pivot tables, and I'm declining these candidates because they haven't used pivot tables. Well, are they savvy? Are they problem solvers? Could they learn that? How long would it take them to learn that? 30 minutes? So, understanding what's trainable. The mindset isn't always trainable. That problem solver, that being excited about building something, that's something that you either usually have or you don't have. So that's something that we really try to prioritize hiring people with that. And it's not that we don't look for people with industry experience. We look for people with adjacent industry experience so they generally know what we're doing. Not in all positions. There's positions where we'll train for sure, but for like a sales position, we can't hire someone who just has no relevant experience because it would take too long to learn the actual specifics of the product in the industry. But we'll hire people from adjacent industries that have that right skill or that right mindset. And I think it's something that, as in talent acquisition and HR, we know that inherently. We've seen this over and over. It's very easy for managers to say, I want someone with all this experience. And you think that's great. That doesn't exist, but they insist. And then they find someone who has most of it, and then that person's not successful, because it's really easier as a manager to look for those things that are industry experience, pivot tables, the day to day, as opposed to interviewing for the mindset. And it does sometimes take time for managers to understand that. So some of our managers who would say, well, we just need to hire fast and we need to hire people from our industry, they made those mistakes and now they've learned and they've come around on their own to now aligning with what we've been trying to help educate and get people on board. But I think now the train is moving, which is great, and everyone really understands it's the mindset. And at an executive leadership team, we talk about that, and we've talked about this transition of who we're hiring and why, and that helps that team, and then that helps their managers so that when they do have an open position, people are starting to be on the same page of hiring for the right people. And we've just seen such impact. Results speak for themselves, and when you show your value as an HR leader by showing how we can do things better to have more impact for the business, then people will start to listen and they'll want to start to do things maybe more aligned with how you will do it as opposed to what maybe they think just out of the box is needing some of those hard skills. So showing the value over time has really helped us bring the managers alongside that conversation.
So you got me thinking out a really interesting line of questioning here. Showing the value over time, having dramatic results, dramatic impact. And then I'm coupling that. So I'm going off the reservation here a little bit. This isn't something we've talked about before. We talked about your internal customers and understanding them. This feels like the business management course that you went through, like marketing 101, like understanding your customers. And then at the same time, a part of marketing 101 is you have to have a campaign with those customers. You have to be constantly communicating with them. And guess what? You got to prove that what you're doing actually works, that impact, those results, share it over time. So what do we do? Typically, as marketers, we'll put together case studies, testimonials like, here, this is what's happening. It's not just, I hear it in the hallways or that person worked out. It feels like it's doing some good stuff. How important is it for you to make the case internally, prove it, put together the materials, and be like, this is why we do this kind of stuff?
It's important. It's important for many reasons. If you're trying to prove that it's the right decision and the right approach, if you're trying to show that it actually worked and it's something we should replicate, we were really fortunate. Our CEO, when COVID hit and everyone was remote, and people started to bring people back in the office because they felt like they couldn't tell if people were being productive or not, or there was this misconception that because people were working from home, they weren't productive. And he said, let's challenge that and let's come up with dashboards and KPIs for every single position, every single department within the company so that we can see how productive our employees are being and we can evaluate them in that way. So there's this discipline already internally of being able to see how people are performing. And we've seen that we have higher retention, we have higher performance, we have higher satisfaction scores and employee experience scores when we hire people for the right mindset and maybe some of those adjacent skill sets. We've seen that, and we're fortunate because we had that project where we built out our internal dashboards, which is something that I know he and the team were really proud of that because it helps us figure out, is it the right way? I might think it's the right way, but if we can't see the results, then maybe it's not. So that helped us a lot. And when you see things, especially in things like sales, you can see the numbers and you can see hitting your numbers and you can see the curves when people are joining. And before, when the curve was flat, building pipeline or making their sales. And now the curve goes up so dramatically. It's really been awesome to see that on paper. You can't argue with those results.
I love it. We have this mentality in the business world of prove it to me. This is the business. I might make emotional decisions somewhere else in my life, snap decisions, but in business, at least the expectation is we think about things rationally, even though we know that's not true. But prove it to me is a really good thing. And creating those dashboards and those KPIs is brilliant.
I agree. And I want to say one thing about that, something that I took away from my program, as well as something that I see every day. And that is that as HR leaders, there sometimes is one way to solve a problem, but oftentimes there's so many different ways to solve a problem. And I think as HR leaders, we think, what's the best way? What's the right way? But one thing I took away was when we were given these case studies and we're in a table of 5 or 6 people and we go around the table and we say, what would you do next? How would you handle it? Every single person had a different approach. And it doesn't mean one was right and one was wrong. They had pros and cons and there was different contexts for why they would do it. But as long as you're seeing the results, that's most important. But there are a lot of different ways to get to the same outcome sometimes. So the results are what matter most. And then if we're rowing along together and we're on the same team, that's how we can build that trust and build that understanding that as HRs, we're more than being administrative. We're thought partners and we're strategic advisors as well. So I think that's something that was really important to me that I took away when I'm faced with a new problem. And I think, well, how do we solve this? This is new. Knowing that there's a lot of different ways and let's figure it out together and let's break this down. Let's figure out where we're trying to go and come up with what makes sense for us as a company, given the context and the stage we're in right now. So that's something that's helped me a lot. I think about that a lot.
So we've covered a lot. Is there something that you wanted to make sure that we talked about that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah. I think we've covered a lot of things. I think just to bring it all back together, some of the key points I would love to just make sure that we highlight are being a strategic leader takes time. You have to build that relationship. I think it comes from different ways, sitting in on meetings, going to your industry events, talking to your leaders, showing your value, showing up to the meetings that you need to be at, whether you're invited or not. I know an HR business partner who shows up to meetings and she says, I think you forgot to send me the invite, but I'm here now. So it's all good. Showing up to the table and earning that seat, keeping that seat by adding value, reminding people we're all on the same team. Let's all row together to try to get to this place. And one thing that we didn't really talk about that is part of that, well, we did talk about a little bit, but just to touch on it more specifically is the coaching of the leadership. And one thing that I find very valuable and that I took away from the program was how to coach leaders. And that for me comes from having conversations, having time with them so that you can have the time to do that coaching, but it's through asking thoughtful questions for me. That's how I find I'm able to influence the most. If you come in as HR and you say, here's how I think we need to handle this, people will say, well, no, I think we should handle it this way. But when you ask questions of what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to achieve? Have you thought about doing it this way? What is your concern with doing it that way? What if we did it this way? What else aren't we thinking of? There's so many questions you can ask to help coach your leaders indirectly. So I think that's something that's an important skill set as well as an HR leader is how do you influence and coach without telling people exactly what to do all the time. And there's time and place for that too. But coaching through questions is something that is very interesting and it helps people come to sometimes the same solutions that you would come to, but it's their ideas. They're more bought in. So it just helps that coaching through questions, I think, is really important.
Oh, I love that. And asking the question shows your passion, your desire to learn. You're more invested, and it just starts to change that trajectory of how you're perceived. So, I have one last question for you because we have covered a lot here. But we as humans, we can only remember about two or three things at a time that we get lost. So, what's the single most important takeaway that you want people to have and remember after consuming this podcast episode?
That's a tough one to distill it all down into one. But the thing that comes to mind first is that to be a strategic HR partner, it takes time. It takes time to build that trust. You have to prove your value. You don't just give in a seat sometimes. And even if you do have one, you have to keep it. So I think understanding that building that relationship takes time and being okay with that and figuring out how you can continue to build the relationships so that you can earn your seat at the table so that you can provide the most value to your organizations is key.
Here's what I know is going to happen. We're going to have more questions on this. If people had questions, would it be okay if we gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile?
Sure. Yes, of course.
Well, fantastic. Well, Christine, thank you. Thank you for coming on and giving us so much to think about in so many wonderful ways. If we push ourselves to innovate and think differently, then I call that the rising tide that lifts all boats. And that's what the mission of this podcast is about. And you significantly pushed that mission forward today. Thank you so much for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and share my insights and have a good conversation. So thank you for having me.